Please allow me to invite Mr. Osman Sultan, Chief Executive Officer of DO, to our stage.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure, but when it comes to blockchain, it is as well a little bit frightening as a responsibility to speak in front of all of you experts or working in this field. You will have the opportunity during the very interesting sessions that will happen to listen in detail from that. Far from me the idea to think that you will learn from what I'm saying today something that you don't know on blockchain, but this is not the purpose. What I'm proposing is a promenade of the mind. Look at it this way, because a few years back, everybody talked to us saying that there is this next big thing around the block. And you go to another event and you're told that there is artificial intelligence is going the next big thing. And indeed, you have today things that are happening on the technological space where we are seeing almost every day the impact on disrupting everything we do in our lives. So this photo is Vatican Place in 2005. This is the time of the announcement of a new pope and all these people. So it's something that people have in their lives and they believe. 2015, Vatican Square, the announcement of the new pope. And the picture looks like this. So obviously, something is changing. Let's not go far like this. Every day, I'm sure, in social dinners with your friends, you have discussions about, oh my God, but this is even frightening. And we see around us this contradicted excitement on one hand and being a little bit concerned of what happens because so this is not something abnormal. Change is something to a certain extent in our DNA because we are born children. We're newly born, we became children, then we become young women and young men, then we became adults, and then we get old, etc. This is something, and very often when we are young, if you notice, we want to accelerate this pace because it's about the pace. How many times you see a very young teenager, he wants to jump years because he wants to drive or he wants to be independent, he or she wants to. So all this. Change, when change becomes rapid, we feel it as disturbance. And we are, in most of these buzzwords that I mentioned, feeling the rapid change. I mean, it starts by when the altitude of a plane changes a little bit abruptly, we feel it, and the pilot feels the need to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we are going through a turbulence. So we feel it as turbulence. Even in our day-to-day life, I have my boss, I said to my boss, you will have this for next week, and then he calls me and he tells me, I need it actually tomorrow. I'm disturbing my entire schedule. I feel uncomfortable. This is as basic as this. Now, when change, the pace of change is totally disrupting the way I do things, we feel it as crisis. From the change in flow of money, economic and financial crisis, from the change of the speed of the movement of tectonic plates of Earth on a geological scale, earthquakes and tsunamis. This is how it is felt. It started the first 2 decades ago, everything, you know, we started the story from physical to digital. And the change was huge at various levels. Next slide. I don't want us to look at every number, but just look at this is what happens on the internet. This is today in 2018 in 60 seconds. So just look at the number Netflix. 266,000 hours are watched on Netflix in a minute. So obviously what's around us in terms of quantum is a huge story happening. Look at all the other numbers. Don't keep these numbers in mind. The moment the slide is printed, it becomes obsolete, you know, with the speed of things happening. A change in speed, because we said it's not the change itself, it's the pace of speed. This is the time it took for any new technology to reach 50 million users. From 68 years to have 50 million people taking an airplane, it took 68 years to 19 days on Pokemon Go to reach 50 million users. Obviously, technology around us, the evolution, this person is totally working on a different DNA than you and I, who were born at a different generation. Not you ladies, of course, you're still young to be within this category. I know that. I wouldn't dare saying otherwise. This lovely and video that makes us smile is actually an illustration. Steve Jobs has coded a part of her operating system. By inducing different behavior, this little girl tomorrow is going to live in a world where the shared economy, distributed economy, a world where the business models are radically changing, and her behavior is going to be the fuel of this new economy. Very difficult to predict, very difficult to say what and what will not be a reality. Let me elaborate. I don't want to take too much. People say, but this is even a change in new civilizations. I dare to say it's actually a simple story as old as civilization itself. Because it is not a coincidence, if you look at history of cities, civilization, that they were created and they were developed, born and developed around natural ways of communication. Why do we speak about the civilization along the Nile? Why do we speak about the Mediterranean civilization? Why do we speak a civilization around the Arabian Gulf? Because there were natural ways, next slide, of transport for people, merchandise, etc., to create this communication. And around that, the equation was very simple. Next slide. Content was moved through these transport means to become, next slide, used in experience and lifestyle. Let's not think digital content, distributed blockchain. Let's think these trees that were cut in forest, moved along rivers, and then going to become things that human beings were using. This paradigm, this model has not changed, and I dare to say it is the simple story, the same simple story that is, and this is something refreshing. This is something comforting. We need to look at that. We need to have the reading. Next slide. The construction of this abundance model, I like it. I was privileged to really be at the beginning of the internet in a telecom company, but we were in a subsidiary that was dealing with this very early, something almost late 80s. So we witnessed the birth of the internet, the information highway of Mr. Al Gore, etc. Next slide. And in the mid-90s, we used to go to the internet like we go to a library. If you remember these names that you had at the time, Google, Yahoo, AOL, these were search engines. And the internet started by being an instrument between academics to exchange, knowledge. So that was mainly this we used. 5 years after, next slide, we started to go to the internet like we go to a shop, like we go to a store. We started being able to buy train tickets, or the merchants saw this footfall place and started to come to this. You can't prevent the merchants from coming into the temple. So this is what happened. But the real explosion of that, mid-2005, when social networking happened, when the empowerment of people, when we started to go to the internet like we go into a cafe. We come home, we started to go, oh, this person did this today, this lady is wearing this today, or this people taking photos of what they eat, what they dress, etc. And that had two things. We started to move from depth to breadth. When we used to go to the search engine, we were going deep in a subject. Today, our kids are getting the piece of info on the spot, not because, I'm a generation when we had a piece of info and we didn't know, oh, but this is said in BBC, this is said in this is Ahram wrote this, or Nahar, or this, etc. So they were trusted sources, so we know. Today, the young generation is taking this piece of info from the 700 contacts they have, and this info can be distorted and fake info, and then the info is coming and change, etc. So this is a whole new ecosystem that is built around that. This is what I called, we're moving from the unshared certainties. In telcos, we had our certainties. Telcos, 30 years ago, they had power of states. Telecom regulatory authorities didn't exist. They were state-owned companies that were regulators, operators, technology providers, etc. So we used to do the unshared certainty. We did not need to talk to content providers, film studios, music, etc. We didn't need to have this conversation. Even handset manufacturers, etc. This was just a relation. Today, we move from the unshared certainties to what I call the shared uncertainties. Because we all sit around the table, but we sit around the table to discuss models that are totally uncertain and to be discovered and eternally revisited. And that's the fascinating part of what we are seeing today. And blockchain, because of its distributed, is a multi-component, multi-stakeholder, multi-layered ecosystem. So this is at the heart of finding within use cases a new business model that we have to figure out. Next slide, please. The main thing in this is what I call, in this reading that I am sharing with you, is the move from vertical to horizontal. And I want to illustrate this with the construction of the models around the smart city, the blockchain ecosystem. Dubai, for instance, years ago, started to be dealing with Dubai was a smart way. When we entered Dubai, it was a smart way to enter. When we deal with our utility company, it's a smart way of doing this with DIWA. When we deal with our government agencies, it's a smart way. But being a city of smart application does not make it where all these existed separately, as you see here, the vertical, does not make it a smart city construction per se. The change is when we move to, next slide. Here you have to follow me very carefully because it's a construction. When everything becomes sensing, this is having a digital master planning, deciding where do you want to put these, what we are told will be tens of thousands, millions, tens of millions of sensors, depending on what you want. from a sensor on a window to a sensor in an elevator, and a camera on a drone, a lamppost, signs on the red lights in the street, cars, humans, etc. The limit is only the imagination. On that, you will have a digital infrastructure, you will have the connectivity, everything will start becoming connected. So you will have a digital infrastructure, and this is where the blockchain ecosystem will build. You have the cloud players. Next slide is a sum of the people in the ecosystem providing cloud. On top of that, you will have the people working in protocols. And among you today, I'm sure you have all of these. Then you have people that will provide the smart tools, API gateways, identity services, payment gateways. Then on top of this, and this is what we do, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, usually I don't want to have one sign of you on my slides in this telling of the story, but to illustrate, this is what we provide, blockchain platform as a service. We are not in the business. Yes, we can contribute with partner. We need to contribute to partner. But what we bring to the equation is we provide the blockchain platform as a service to these companies. Of course, on top of this, you have all the smart applications, whether it's transport, utilities, healthcare, education, government. My colleagues will be on some of the panels and talks and will speak about some of these use cases I'm unable to do. And that is the blockchain ecosystem. On top of this blockchain ecosystem, you will have all the smart entities, police, etc. And on top of that, you will have what you do to make everything smart, everything sensing, everything will be connected, and then you make everything smart. Through first the aggregation and this ingestion of this data, then through the transformation, all the data science, and this is what, in the buzzwords, the big data. You've seen that down we have the Internet of Things, IoT, all these buzzwords, the big data. Then you have the artificial intelligence layer. Then you have the decision, what data, what I call the governance program. What is open data, who can access data, who can alter data, etc. And all this will allow innovation to spread much more. This is the construction of the ecosystem where we are seeing all these buzzwords around us, all what we are told, these new next big things that will happen. What will happen in that is, and Mr. Walid mentioned, it's a fact today that a distributed, secure ledger system for authentication, storage, distribution is becoming, yes, but it's not only about technology. It's not only about the various players in technology. It's about a whole ecosystem. Data that is coming from a sensor, when brought together, aggregated, will become information. Add to this the intelligence that is needed, add AI, information can turn to knowledge. And hopefully, that will help to serve the wisdom, to predict, to have insights, to plan better. The users of this are not only the end users, but the users of this can be government entities, people, city planners, people who are planning specifically in a world that is fast changing, having the insights today to start planning better for tomorrow. How will the city look like in 2030? How the city will look like? And this is the fascinating thing about the construction of this ecosystem. Next slide. So we have seen, I lived in a time where it was the big thing was the move from mainframe to desktop. And literally, this was something like 30 years ago, you know, big mainframes. And we had this computer center, and we were so happy. I remember because we loaded one database which was 1 gigabyte. 1 gigabyte. My son goes to buy a phone, he's 16 years old, and he comes, how much did you buy? He said 128. I said, oh, your previous one, it's what? I said, puppy, 64. What is 60? 64 giga is now for him, it is, and tomorrow, you know, because he asked me, and how much do you need? I said, no, my phone is 512. And I said, I have an SD card as well. So you have a terabyte with you? I told him this terabyte is going to become, that's the abundance model that is happening that I was talking about. The construction of this abundance. We moved from mainframe to desktop, we moved from cloud, and now even the cloud is going to become distributed. Next slide. Yesterday, it was about a centralized information. First centralized on the mainframe, then centralized on the desktop on the computer. Today, through the cloud, it's a decentralized information. Tomorrow, it's even the ecosystem is a distributed ecosystem, so where the authentication, storage, etc., will be in a decent. And that is such a paradigm shift that we haven't even imagined how this is going to happen. Next slide. Now, Mr. Walid, now you said it is a reality. Yes, it will be. Yes, for somehow. It is always from a hype, and we like exaggerating the hype, to a disillusion phase, and some who bought a cryptocurrency at the hype are living a little bit of this disillusion, to reality. And for that, I don't want to claim to be an expert. And this is where they placed some, I mean, you might challenge that. You're certainly more expert than me. But if you see blockchain, it's a 5 to 10 years to reach the productivity. Cryptocurrencies are a 2 to 5 years. We are actually in this slope of enlightenment because after the speculation part on cryptocurrency and all the hype, started with the hype and disillusion, now we are on a much more rational way of dealing with it, use it. As you rightly said, financial institutions, government entity are now looking at this and looking at this blockchain technology as an enablement of a lot of things to facilitate. If you push it to the maximum, if everything becomes decentralized, not only at the level of currency, but at the level of any transaction, every asset, the role of government is going to change radically. I heard recently, in parallel to the World Economic Forum, a minister saying, it is clear today, an Australian minister saying, it is clear today that these institutions that were created after the Second World War in order to ensure that the the order of international rules is really prevailing. She was talking Monetary Fund, International IMF, she was talking World Bank, she was talking WTO, with the type of things that are happening with digital, with sharing economy where the assets are becoming, and with tomorrow a distributed economy, are going to be seriously challenged, and probably we will need to invent new rules for international order. So this is to this level that we are. And that's a construction that will happen little by little. Isn't it very exciting? Next. Now, and this is the part that I really is very dear to my heart. I lived a time, more than 30 years ago, in one of the largest telecom companies in the world, where we were all fascinated and running behind what technology says possible. We can do it. These companies, all telcos, were driven by engineers, telecom engineers, they were fascinated. And guess what? We didn't have competition because telecom services with only one provider. And then competition started. It started in the mobile front. So it was a conversation between what technology says possible and what economy says viable. Oh yes, technology makes it possible, but there is no business case. This is where we started seeing CFOs becoming more and more the important person, because he has, no, you don't have a business case, it's not viable, we don't do it. I think today we are going into a fascinating, a new phase. It's a conversation, it's a third component in this conversation. It's the discussion between what technology says possible, what economy says viable, but what societal says desirable, needed. And that is a discussion. If you see remarks and what is written around AI, there are big questions. So, next slide. We have seen the move from human to automated to digital. Then we made, on top of digital, smart. And now we are told that we will move into intelligent robot. It's fascinating to think that we have spent decades trying to automate what human can do. And now we are spending, if you see some, on TV and some documentaries, now we are trying to humanize robots. So there is, you say we want to induce emotions, we want to induce, there are these people there, they have emotions. So I want to express an act of faith. I've been in this industry, I'm passionate about that, and please don't get me wrong. I have been in the last 35 years a technology optimistic and believing in it. But I think the act of faith should be back to the future. We moved from human to automated to digital to smart. We have to put human at the center of all these complex equations and ecosystems. We need it. We need it to do it for our children. They will do this by themselves. And the new generation, now it seems that Generation Z is even, you have Generation Alpha, who is different in the needs. I was reading an article about design and marketing to this Generation Z. So we have to do it. For that, next slide. Today in blockchain, as an illustration, I think the technology factor is on the way to be there. I even believe that even on the regulation factor, we are a little bit behind, but we will be there. The societal factor is where a lot has to be asked, a lot has to be framed, a lot has to be aligned. Next slide. And we need to do it in order to frame that, to align that. I believe we need to move from what I call the culture of the right answer. And some of you remember when we were in school and we needed to know the answer. We were asked a question and I needed to know by heart the answer. Today we are in a world where we need to ensure that we have the right question. We need to move from the culture of the right answer to the culture of the right question. I sit on the board of some educational platform, and believe me, this is fundamental. Even in our companies, how many times with our team, with the various colleagues, I try to say, are we framing properly the question, the situation, the issue that we need to solve? So that culture. For doing this, and I will conclude, if we work out of fear, in the history of society, civilization, you always have a driver and a cursor balancing between fear or greed. And this is even in the stock market, from fear to greed. Reactions are everybody is afraid, and then everybody becomes greedy, and this is how we see. In this construction of these new ecosystems, if we move by fear, we will lose. If we move by pure greed, and if we let the equation only to shareholders' interest, we will lose. Because it's so fundamental in how humanity is moving. I think we all owe it to our children. We need to open. I don't have a recipe. What I know is we need to open our eyes. We need to open our minds in order to understand that how many times we see resistance. We see people, no, we know how to do it. We've been doing this. Open our minds and open our hearts to embrace this. I will end with my last slide. In the late 90s, there was on the Yahoo website, there is a new master of the digital universe. Because more than ever today, specifically when it becomes more and more and more distributed, it will put emphasis on the smallest component, and that is you. You will become a more important. I like to call it the new universe. The conversation is on. You are part of it, and I'm so privileged that you invited me to share part of this conversation with you. Thank you very much.